WABC's coast-to-coast network of independent affiliated stations, the University of Chicago Round Table. Harold C. Urey of the Department of Chemistry of the University of Chicago. Mr. Urey.
Recently, a book on the atomic bomb has been published by a distinguished English scientist, Professor P.M.S. Blackett of Manchester. This book, known as Fear, War, and the Bomb, plays down the atomic bomb. The results and the conclusions that are arrived at by Dr. Blackett disagree very considerably with those that have been reached by other scientists in the years since the war. We wish to review some of the things that Dr. Blackett says and to review the whole problem of the bomb. Joining in this roundtable analysis of the bomb in the next war are Louis N. Ridenour, Dean of the Graduate School of the University of Illinois, and Thorfinn Hognes, Director of the Institute of Radiobiology and Biophysics of the University of Chicago. Hognes, why should we scientists concern ourselves about what Professor Blackett in England says about the atomic bomb?
Well, first, perhaps I should say something about Professor Blackett's qualifications. He is a professor of physics at the University of Manchester. He received the Nobel Prize for his work on cosmic rays. He therefore has great prestige scientifically. On the other hand, he is known to be very far on the left. We're not so sure, therefore, of his qualifications to discuss the political aspects. Now, it is a responsibility of science has a responsibility to the public. It has prestige. The public wants conclusions. It cannot always follow the arguments. It expects unbiased objectivity and intellectual honesty. We believe that Professor Blackett misuses his prestige as a scientist. He harms science and the cause of democracy, and perhaps he will harm the Russian people, too, in that he will cause the Russians to be rash and perhaps precipitate some very serious incident.
Well, Ridenour, why should the American people be concerned about a single book written in England which says the atomic bomb would be of minor importance in a war between Russia and the West?
They should be concerned with this because of the great importance of the issue. Blackett depreciates some of the military tools in which we put our greatest reliance for the strength and the security of this nation. If his views are right, rather than those which are urged by the majority of American and British scientists, then this has important implications on the organization of our military services, on our willingness to make expenditures for various classes of armaments, and on such subjects as that of universal military training. Further, he suggests rather that the negotiations for the international control of atomic energy, which have so far been carried on, have been wrong-headed in their approach to the problem, and in effect suggests that we are taking this particular subject a little too seriously.
The round table invited Professor Blackett to appear on this round table, but we are sorry that he found it impossible to do so. In view of this, it is necessary for us to tell you what Professor Blackett says. He says that the atomic bomb is overrated and is not the absolute weapon, for two reasons. First, the analysis of the bombing experience in World War II shows that strategic bombing, that is, an attempt to destroy the industry of the country, is ineffective. And second, atomic bombs do not add very much to the bombing power of a nation. Ridenour, you were advisor to the European Air Force in the late war. Will you discuss his contentions in this connection?
Well, I disagree with him altogether. He draws his figures and facts from the very good report of the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, which was made after the war by economists and other specialists, and which had for its purpose the evaluation of our strategic bombardment effort in attacking and destroying the German economy. Now, he draws his figures from this report, to be sure, but he emphasizes the figures in this report which dealt with the period prior to the 1st of July, 1944. This is the time during which the Royal Air Force of England and our own Air Force were learning the business of strategic bombardment. This is the time during which we had very few aircraft, during which our bombardment effort was sparse, the bombing was inaccurate, and it's perfectly true that the results were small, possibly even negligible. However, fewer than one-third of the total weight of bombs dropped on Germany was dropped during this period, which is so carefully explored by Professor Blackett. 2/3 of our bombs were dropped after the 1st of July, 1944, and in the 300 days that followed, brought the German economy completely to a stop, particularly by the attacks made on the target systems of oil and transportation.
Now, this evidence was all available when Mr. Blackett published his book last fall, I believe.
That's correct. It's even referred to in his book, but he does not draw his argument from it.
He says, though, that strategic bombing is ineffective. He says that the atom bomb is a strategic weapon. Therefore, the atomic bomb is not an effective bomb. He does say that it would be useful tactically. That is, if we admit that it could destroy airfields, it would prevent the landing of troops. It could destroy the submarine pens and harbors. But I wouldn't agree with him anyway that it is not a strategic weapon, inasmuch as we could destroy their oil production, ball bearing factories, and the like.
Of course, he mentions over-destruction. I think this is a curious point. If bombs don't cost very much, I don't see any harm in over-destroying a target. He says that the atomic bomb is equivalent to 2,000 tons of ordinary TNT bombs, a figure that I believe has been agreed to by people in this country as well. I don't take much comfort from a bomb that is only 2,000 tons, equivalent of ordinary bombs. He also does not mention an important phase of the atomic bomb, it seems to me. I saw the second explosion at Bikini. I didn't get the opportunity to study the radioactive effects the way Dr. Bradley, who recently wrote No Place to Hide, did. But I think if you followed the newspapers carefully since Bikini, you will realize that these radioactive effects are very serious indeed. If a bomb should be exploded in water off Chicago or many other cities of this country or Europe, and the wind carried the radioactive effects into the city, a substantial area would be quite uninhabitable for a long period of time. This is completely neglected by Mr. Blackett.
Another factor that he neglects is that of saturation. It was the attempt of the Air Forces during the war the Air Forces attempted then to have a great number of bombers at one time, 1,000 bomber raids, so that they could saturate to the extent that the fire departments or the fire equipment could not put out the fires. In the case of the atom bomb, we have complete saturation. Anyone who has read Hersey's book on Hiroshima would really appreciate what this means. All the fire departments were put out. All of the hospitals, the doctors, there was complete chaos, and this was all accomplished not in the question of half hour or something like that, but all within 1 minute's time or less.
I suppose also that he has neglected, I think, the possibility of carrying many bombs along on a single raid instead of just one, which seems to be the way that he imagines the next war would take place.
Of course, Blackett also raises the point that the standard propeller-driven subsonic bombers of the present day would be intercepted by defensive fighters if they attempted to carry bombs to strategic targets. They would therefore have to be accompanied by defensive fighters, which would require bases near the targets to be attacked. He also says that even if bombers were to operate unescorted, they'd require bases within perhaps 1,500 miles of their targets, as they did in the last war. Recent newspaper stories have made it clear, of course, that modern bombers, with or without the technique of air-to-air refueling, which has now been satisfactorily worked out, have at present global range. Further, with regard to the matter of defense against the attacks of strategic bombers, the history of World War II has indicated that any new form of attack obtains a local mastery over the defense for a few days at the beginning. Now, in the days in which it was necessary to use ordinary high explosive during such attacks, only a moderate amount of destruction could be produced. With the atomic bomb, with one bomber being equivalent to 200 of the old sort, a tremendous amount of destruction, perhaps an amount that would produce a very profound effect on the course of the war, can be carried out during these early days of low defense efficiency.
There's another factor that he doesn't take into account, or it doesn't mention anyway too much, and that is the number of bombs, and that is exceedingly important. It makes a great deal of difference in our thinking, whether we have 25 bombs or 2,000 bombs, and people in this country are so apt, and abroad too are so apt to think of the bomb as the solution.
Another claim that Blackett makes is that the use of atomic bombs by America was quite unnecessary, since the Japanese were prepared to surrender in any case, and that our hurried use of atomic bombs was in fact the first move in the Cold War. We intended to make sure that Japan surrendered to us and us alone, so that the Russians should get no credit for the collapse of Japan.
I might remark that there was a committee that reviewed this whole question of dropping the bomb before it was used on Japan. And, however, I would like to say that, in my opinion, behind any committee that considers such a problem as this is the American public. And the representatives of the American people, our government officials in Washington, are going to make their decisions in accordance with what we, the people, think. They guessed, and I maintain that they guessed correctly, that the people of the United States would approve the use of the bomb on Japan, and that this was the principal reason why it was used. Mr. Blackett may not like this decision, but I think he should realize that it's essentially the decision of the people of the United States, you and me.
Mr. Blackett condemns our use of the bomb. He condemns almost everything we did. He seems to think that everything Russia does was quite all right. Now, hindsight is very much easier than foresight. And he can say, then predict that we should not, by hindsight, predict we should not have used this. Now, we did not know at the time how well prepared the Japanese were. We had every reason to believe that the taking of the home islands of Japan would be a very difficult task. We found later that there were 5,000 kamikazes available, and I can imagine the tremendous destruction that 5,000 kamikazes could do to our landing troops. We believe that we saved lives, both Japanese, American, and Russian lives, by the dropping of the bomb.
Well, Hogness, having said this, that we initiated the Cold War by the dropping of the bomb, Blackett argues that the American Baruch Plan for the control of atomic energy was another move in the Cold War. Blackett says the discussions on the scheme of international control disclosed a deliberate attempt by the West to deprive Russia of an opportunity of raising the economic standard of living of their peoples by developing the industrial uses of atomic energy. And therefore, Blackett says, Russia was right to refuse to join the Baruch Plan.
Of course, the American proposals now that were put forward by Mr. Baruch, we might review briefly what some of the points were. It was proposed that there be an atomic development authority under the United Nations, which would have entire control and, in fact, ownership of all atomic energy activities, as a very important part of the whole scheme. In the second place, that there was to be an inspection of force, also under the United Nations, which would be able to detect any clandestine activities of any kind. Finally, Mr. Baruch introduced the veto question, namely that the veto in the Security Council should not be applied to activities of the Atomic Development Authority. These various proposals were extended and modified slightly during the long time in which it was discussed, but this essentially is the important part of this proposal. Right now, I think it might... I think perhaps it would be a good idea if we mentioned the possibility of industrial use of atomic energy. Hogness, what do you think about this?
Well, I think that Blackett is rather hard put to it to defend the Russian position. He maintains that the Baruch Plan would prevent the Russians from developing atomic power for use, say, in Siberia. I think this is a lot of nonsense. It is quite true, I think, that we shall have atomic power and a pilot plant within 3 years, maybe 5 years. But to build a large plant, large installations, is going to be a long time off. And it would seem to me that had the Russians accepted the Baruch plan, they could advance faster than they can at the present time.
One of Blackett's other reasons for regarding the U.S. atomic control plan as a plot is that he says it would prevent the Russians from keeping secret the location of their arms factories and other important economic installations without giving them any corresponding military compensation in return. This is a rather curious argument because it has importance only if it is admitted that strategic bombardment is effective on targets once their location is known, something which Blackett has earlier denied.
In fact, the argument goes the way he wants it to go.
At every stage.
At every stage, yes.
Blackett really says and wants us to go along for the next 10 years. He has a way out. And it's rather questionable, it seems to me. He says that there will be no war between the United States and Russia in the next few years. The reasons he gives for this is that it would be overwhelmingly to the Russians' advantage to avoid war. And he says America, for a number of reasons, will not precipitate one. Now, what he wants us to do is to give Russia time to develop bombs, submarines, underwater weapons, and defense, air defense. And he says that if we do not wait until 10 years, is the time he puts up, then Russia will hold all the cards. We could negotiate with Russia in the meantime, however, but he implies we would have to do so on Russia's terms. It would be a bargain between us. Now let us imagine what these terms would be. I'm sure that the Russians would ask us that we'd keep our hands off Europe and allow Russia to take over Western Europe as she did Czechoslovakia, to put the peoples of Europe under Russian bondage. We should then be selling the European signers of the North Atlantic Pact down the river, or we would be forced into another war. Now, what are we going to do in the meantime to try to prevent such a situation from arising?
Now, it seems to me, after reviewing the various things that are said by Dr. Blackett in this book, that he has selected data in accordance with his particular thesis. I think this is true in regard to the Strategic Bombing Survey. I think it is true in regard to quite a number of other things. And so far as I am concerned, it seems to me that it is possible to accuse Mr. Blackett, very nearly at least, of intellectual dishonesty. By intellectual dishonesty, we mean that a man selects his data in such a way as to support a certain conclusion and does not include those types of arguments which may not be friendly to that argument. For this reason, I think that we can drop the discussion of Dr. Blackett's book. It is probably the best presentation of the communist point of view of the argument on atomic energy that we've had.
But before we do so, I think we should mention one fact, that Blackett is recommending exactly what the United States is now doing. We are drifting along and waiting until the Russians get the atom bomb. Blackett suggests that we maintain the status quo. He implies that the critical period will be some 10 years hence and that Russia will have plenty of bombs. He says to us, don't worry, the bomb is no good anyway.
I agree we should forget about Professor Blackett's book and should take up the present situation. What should we do today? I think it might be argued that we should now withdraw the Baruch proposal from the United Nations. We cannot sincerely or sensibly leave it there, for the situation is entirely different from the situation that obtained when it was introduced. I think there's even some doubt that the Senate of the United States would ratify this plan if it were presented for ratification because of approval by all of the other nations, members of the United Nations. It might be quite embarrassing for the Senate to be so presented with this plan.
Well, it seems to me that we ought to ratify the North Atlantic Pact and join in the creation of an Atlantic Union. This would give us a preponderance of military power. And let us guarantee a democratic form of government to every state in the Atlantic Pact.
I agree with you, Hogness. During the 19th century, this country grew great in a atmosphere of relative security, separated from the rest of the world by broad oceans on both sides that were a very important defense posts at that time. What has happened to us in this last 50 years is that these defenses have become unimportant. And this is the disturbing fact that we as a country must face at the present time. It would be very nice to recover some of that measure of political security which we had in the 19th century. Perhaps we will never get as much of it as we had then. But this idea of an Atlantic Federal Union, it seems to me, would come nearer to it than anything else that I have heard proposed. It would mean that we would set up a federal government over and above the governments that are adhering to the Atlantic Pact, having executive, legislative, judicial powers, the right of taxation, and a certain limited sovereignty, including, of course, the control of the military and all foreign affairs. This, it seems to me, would give us a very considerable amount of political security, though, of course, it is not the ideal, which would be finally government over the whole globe.
Well, Yuri, how do you think that this would deter the Russians?
Well, I have observed that in some cases, wars have been avoided over long periods of time because countries of very unequal potential power are side by side. The strong one does not attack because he doesn't need to, and the weak one doesn't attack because he can't. It seems to me that the thing that is really dangerous in the world at the present time is that we get a very nearly equal balance of power between two groups. If we could only make it completely unequal, the possibility of war might be very substantially decreased. And I'm quite sure, as I know which side I'd like to have be very strong, I myself might exert some influence in preventing the stronger one from making the attack.
Well, do you think that this would prevent a Russian coup in any one of these countries?
Yes, of course, you would have an Atlantic Federal Union that would guarantee to all the countries a democratic form of government. And if something of the sort of Czechoslovakia was pulled, the Federal Union would have a right to say something about it. No such business as Czechoslovakia could take place in the state of the United States without having serious difficulty about
gentlemen, this is a very large and ambitious goal, and I think we ought to ask ourselves whether there aren't other smaller, simpler things that we can do in the face of the present situation and in light of our long-range goals. For example, Senator McMahon, the author of the United States Atomic Energy Act, has recently questioned whether the Congress and the people should not have a full knowledge of the extent of our stockpile of atomic bomb material. He expresses his profound discomfort in sitting in the Senate of the United States and making important decisions regarding policy in ignorance of this extremely important matter. How would it be if we told our people and the Russian people as well how many atomic bombs we have today? This might have the result of enabling them to make a much more realistic assessment of our position in this matter than they can do now. It might prevent a catastrophe resulting from a miscalculation. Further, since the American people and the American government, in effect, do not know how many atomic bombs we have, how can they make good judgments on such matters as the wisdom and the necessity of universal military training, the balance of government expenditures as between the ground army, the Air Force, and the Navy, and similar matters? How can they even know whether the work of the Atomic Energy Commission is being successful or is a failure? I heard recently of 2 guesses made by scientists with no firm knowledge in the matter, but with a general knowledge of the surrounding circumstances, regarding the number of atomic bombs the United States now has. A Canadian scientist guessed that we might have a stockpile of 25 bombs. A distinguished American scientist guessed that we had a stockpile of 2,000. This factor of 100, which separates the estimates of people who are at least minor authorities in this matter, is a measure of the ignorance of the American people in this important affair. As a matter of fact, the internal energy monopoly we now have and the secrecy that goes with it were predicated on the attainment of an early international control of atomic energy having the basic pattern which you outlined earlier. This would then be followed by a relaxation of secrecy and the detailed controls and a more normal scientific and technical development. Such international arrangements now seem indefinitely remote, and it seems to me we should therefore review from the beginning our domestic control situation and what should be done about it.
I agree with you right now. I think that's very true.
I think we need to reduce the amount of secrecy around atomic power and to turn it into an industry like any other. Under the present policies, the American people will never have the maximum amount of energy or power, or energy I should say, by able Americans working in atomic energy, or atomic power. The best engineering brains in America are in other industries where they can make money. Under the present secrecy arrangement, Lilienthal says, American corporations are not interested in atomic energy. With the present secrecy arrangements and monopoly by the government, no one can make any money, and no one can make a scientific, or I should say a professional reputation by work in atomic energy today, for research papers are not easily published, and reputations therefore cannot be made. The result is that almost all the best men have quit work in atomic energy, and the American people ought to know and understand the meaning of that fact.
Another thing we might do now, a very simple thing, is release to the public the report on the bikini tests. This has been proposed time and again. Has not yet been done, would be important in enabling people to form an informed opinion about the uses of atomic energy in warfare, which have been so thoroughly discussed from so widely divergent standpoints.
Of course, I think that what you propose, Hogness, in regard to decreasing the amount of secrecy about our atomic energy program is possible only in an atmosphere of considerable more security than exists at the present time. And what I was saying a moment ago about the Federal Atlantic Union would, it seems to me, give us that security which might make the...
Of course, I was implying that when I said that.
That's right. I'm sure you agree with me. Well, we've had an interesting discussion in regard to this problem, and I think it might be well to sum up some of our conclusions in regard to this. In the first place, I think we all agree that Dr. Blackett has presented a book which is interesting, but which in many ways is a good apology for the communist point of view in regard to the matter, but otherwise I think can hardly be trusted to give us a good summary of the atomic energy situation. On the positive side, it seems to us that we should review our whole position in regard to the atomic energy problem and how it is handled in this country. A review that should include both the method of control of domestic peacetime uses of atomic energy and the international control of this important power.
Thank you, gentlemen. You have been listening to the University of Chicago Roundtable discuss the atomic bomb and the next war with Louis N. Ridenour, atomic scientist and dean of the Graduate School of the University of Illinois, Harold C. Urey, and Thorfinn Hogness, atomic scientists, both of the University of Chicago, as participants. This week's Roundtable pamphlet includes the full text of today's discussion and an imaginative story on Grand Central Terminal After an Atomic War by Leo Szilard, which you'll want to read. Order this pamphlet and study the special supplementary materials on the bomb and the next war. Because of the quantity of additional features of the pamphlet, please allow 2.5 weeks for printing and mailing. Be sure to write for your copy and send 10 cents in coin with your order to the University of Chicago Roundtable, Chicago 37, Illinois. For $3, you may subscribe to the pamphlet for a full year and receive 52 weekly issues. Now, a special announcement.
Today, through NBC's University of the Air, the University of Chicago Roundtable offers a new adventure in ideas. You can combine roundtable listening and specialized study in 2 roundtable home study courses on world politics and economics in the modern world. These 2 courses offer each roundtable listener a library of authoritative reading material. These courses give you personal, individualized instruction through 14 lessons in a program of study which you complete in your own home. Write today to your local station or to the University of Chicago Roundtable, Chicago 37, Illinois, for the leaflet describing these courses and telling how you may join. Don't miss learning about this opportunity.
Today's Roundtable originated in the Mitchell Tower studios of the University of Chicago. This is NBC, the national broadcasting company.